Hello, and welcome to our sixth CAHRS webcast for 2020. I'm Brad Bell. I'm a professor in the HR Studies Department in the ILR School, and I also serve as the faculty director of the Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies. Very happy to have all you joining us today for our research showcase. This webcast is a bit of a departure from the norm for us. In the past, we've done a number of different webcasts where we've shared the findings of research conducted by both our faculty and students. In these cases, obviously, the presentations often follow the research after the research has been completed. Today, we're going to change this up a bit. We're actually going to share some research that is currently under development. This is work in progress and really serves as an opportunity for us to share some of the cutting edge thinking occurring within CAHRS, as well as to really use this as an opportunity to get some of your feedback and input on some of the research being conducted here at Cornell. We also hope that these projects speak to some of the issues or challenges that you may be facing in your own organizations, and as a result that you may want to get involved with the research. We are very interested in partnering with any companies that may be interested in doing so, and you'll learn throughout the presentations how to express interest in partnering if that might be of interest. So we're going to be sharing two different research projects today. The first project focuses on the role of leaders outside of the HR function in implementing organizations' HR practices in their teams and work groups, and how this can lead to variability in HR delivery. This project is being led by Rebecca Kehoe and Junyoung Kim. Rebecca is an associate professor in the HR Studies Department. She has been conducting academic research in the area of strategic human resources for about 15 years. Some of her most recent research in this area is focused on understanding and improving the HR process, an idea that she'll be elaborating on during today's presentation. Junyoung Kim is a doctoral student in our HR Studies Department, just finished up his first year in our program. He is mainly interested in strategic HR and the impact of HR programs on firm-level outcomes. Before starting his academic career, he worked as an HR consultant and project manager for 10 years in HR consulting firm Mercer and provided HR consulting services to over 60 companies. The second project that we'll be focusing on today aims to better understand team agility, certainly a timely and relevant topic in today's environment. And in particular, really looks at the factors that influence agility, as well as the ways in which teams can effectively navigate disruption. This project is a collaborative effort between myself and one of our doctoral students, Young-hee Annie Kim. Annie is a doctoral student in our HR Studies Department. Her research interests include team dynamics, change management, and the role of HR practices in shaping workplace relations. Before pursuing her PhD, she worked as at a solar energy company for several years. In a second, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca and June to present our first project. As we go through the presentations, again, we're really looking for your input and reactions to the research, given that these, again, are works in progress. So I encourage you to share your comments and questions using the Q&A tool that you see there within your Zoom window. As we go through the presentations, we'll be fielding your questions, and we'll certainly leave some time at the end of the session today to address any other questions we haven't been able to get to. So with that, Becca, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brad. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So what I want to focus on today is this idea of HR process. So recent research has highlighted the critical role that leaders, line managers, middle managers outside the HR function play in shaping the experiences that employees have within organizations' HR practices. So the goal of the study or the research that I'm presenting today is to better understand when and why these leaders vary in the effectiveness of their HR delivery, as well as what organizations can do to improve HR delivery effectiveness across managers and across employees throughout the organization. So while a key focus within the HR function is often on HR design, the design of HR practices, our research focuses on the broader process that follows this design phase, where we think about the HR delivery, the delivery of those HR practices, as well as employees' experiences with those HR practices. The delivery of HR practices often comes down to the hands of line managers, middle managers, other leaders outside the HR function. This can come in the form of managers actually implementing those practices, for example, conducting performance appraisals and providing feedback. It can also come in the form of managers communicating about HR practices to employees, for example, making employees aware of available training opportunities. What this means, or an important implication of this, is that employees' immediate experiences with HR practices often is significantly influenced by their experiences with their managers. This also means that employees' experiences with HR practices can vary a great deal throughout an organization, and this is largely due to the line managers or middle managers who are responsible for delivering those practices to employees. So even when we have an HR practice that is designed with the intent to be applied or available to all employees consistently throughout an organization, we find that in practice this is not always the case. So what's this look like? It can mean that line managers are not consistently performing routine performance appraisals on time or according to standard. It can mean that some groups of employees are not being made aware of available training opportunities. It can mean that managers are not consistently advertising job openings externally or putting internal candidates through formal evaluation processes. Alternatively, it can also look more functional. It can mean local leaders are adapting or modifying HR practices to meet local talent needs that vary within their unit or within their environment relative to what is needed in the rest of the organization. We see this variance in HR delivery for a variety of reasons. First, and most obvious when we talk to HR leaders, it comes down to individual line manager characteristics. So we know that line managers vary in their HR competency, in their technical competency, and this can affect their engagement, their delivery of HR practices. We also know line managers vary a great deal in their motivation to engage with and deliver HR practices to their employees. So a recent example we heard from an HR director was about a line manager who had come up through the ranks of his organization. This is a tech company. He was very much a technical expert. And he believed in managing the technical aspects of his employees' work rather than focusing on delivering HR practices, which he saw as administrative work and he viewed as a waste of his time. So we see clear differences in motivation of managers to even engage with the HR side of their work. But it's not just about manager characteristics. There are important structural and environmental factors that can influence HR delivery variance. So we see that in some organizations, managers' time is always finite. In some cases, their roles are simply too broad to provide adequate time to deliver HR practices effectively. In other cases, they may lack HR support. So we can think about the presence and the availability of an HR business partner, other resources to support the actual implementation of HR practices that can lead to dysfunctional variance. We also know that managers face different local environments. So I pointed to before the idea that in some cases, managers are intentionally modifying HR practices to meet the demands of their local team or the local environment they're facing. Finally, we know that in some cases, organizations intentionally design some HR practices with the intent of local leaders modifying them to accommodate their local needs. So the point is, this variance can be functional, it can be dysfunctional, it happens for a variety of reasons, but at the end of the day, we argue that it needs to be managed because whether we want variance or not, how effectively a manager is going to implement practices is going to vary and is going to depend on how that's managed. So this leads to a natural follow-up question, whether and when this variance in HR delivery is likely to be dysfunctional or functional in organizations. So we see dysfunctional variance in the form of undesirable disconnects between HR design and HR delivery. That is the way that HR practices are designed and intended to be delivered to employees and then what employees actually experience. So when we see these disconnects, these sort of unintentional or undesirable disconnects, this can compromise an organization's investment in HR and undermine the intended benefits of HR practices for key employee outcomes. So for example, if a manager is giving performance ratings that don't actually reflect employees' true performance differences, whether this is for political reasons or to prevent resentment within a team, to the extent that those ratings are aligned or are tied to incentives that the organization has in place, that's undermining that whole system. On the other side, we do see functional variance. Again, when we see managers modifying HR practices to accommodate local needs or to accommodate changes in their environment. So this can allow managers to accommodate needs for different talent requirements within their environments. And it can allow agility in response to dynamic or competitive environments. So I think a good example of this that's fresh for all of us is all of the adaptations we've seen in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So early on, before we had centralized responses, we saw line managers making local modifications of work from home policies before HR had come up with a centralized response. More recently, we've seen adaptations to onboarding, to training, to remote work. And we see line managers, not always, but in many cases, we see local line managers taking the lead on these initiatives. So again, the variance can be functional or it can be dysfunctional. The point is we need to manage it because managers themselves are going to vary in how well they engage otherwise. So at this point, we'd like to sort of turn the table and take stock of some of your own experiences. We'd like to understand what you see and what your observations of HR variance in delivery, variance in HR delivery looks like within your organization. So we have 2 poll questions that Brad's gonna pull up. We'll pull them up one at a time. And this will just give us a nice kind of a quick snapshot of what you've seen in terms of HR variance in your work. Okay, so the first question here that should pop up for you is the variance you see in HR practice delivery across line managers more dysfunctional or functional? So we have more dysfunctional, more functional, half and half, or there's no variance. Okay, so this is interesting. We have 24% saying more dysfunctional, 31% saying more functional, 42% saying 50-50. So it seems like most of you are seeing variance, and it looks like a somewhat even split between the functional, dysfunctional splits and then those who say 50-50. So there's clearly these both types of variance that are important to manage that certainly have different implications for the organization. Brad, could we pull up the next poll? What factors do you believe account for the greatest variance in HR delivery throughout your organization? Line managers' time, line managers' motivation to implement HR practices, line managers' HR competencies, non-HR competencies, and variations in the needs and conditions of different units or departments. And by the way, in writing these questions and the response options, obviously we had to sort of a finite set of options that we could present. We were certainly open to hearing and eager to hear other experiences, other observations that may not fit into the few categories that we're providing here. Pretty big split again. So we have 21% on line managers' time. It looks like the biggest 2 categories, although I don't know if this is a significant difference: line managers' motivation, line managers' HR competencies. So the reason we want to get at this, and of course within our research we try to get at this in a more systematic way within organizations, is that whether we see variance as functional or dysfunctional determines the approach that we want to take to manage it. So if we have dysfunctional variance, it probably means that we're trying to get more consistency across managers within the organization. Whereas when we have functional variance, it may not be that we're trying to reduce the variance that we see across managers, but that we need to make sure that we're managing managers or managing the practices and the process in a way that ensures that that variance is actually effective and is actually accommodating the differences in local needs that we see. So this leads into the three big picture research questions that we're hoping to get at with this research. So what are the primary factors that lead to variance in HR delivery by line managers? What are the conditions under which variance in HR delivery is dysfunctional? When is it functional? So I've talked about examples of functional and dysfunctional variance, but we can also see different conditions within the organization that affect when this is the case. And finally, what can organizations do to improve the effectiveness of HR delivery by line managers? So to get at these questions, we're envisioning a variety or a combination of interview and survey responses within an organization from some combination of managers within and outside of HR, as well as employees. But for organizations that are interested in engaging with us on this research, we are quite open and flexible in terms of the design of that research and what that data collection effort would entail, as well as open to other questions that you might have that are related to this that we could help you to address.
Great, thanks, Becca. So in a minute, we'll turn things over to Annie to share her research. Again, we encourage you as we go through, please share any questions that you may have in the Q&A or any comments that you might have, reactions in the chat, and we'll pick up those as we go along. There are a couple that have come in, so maybe before going on to the next presentation, Becca, I'll throw these to you. Heather kind of, comments, I think, on the last poll that she finds that culture and implicit norms account for a lot of the variance, and kind of interpreted that as motivation in the responses that you provided. Just, what's your reaction to the idea of the role that culture and norms might play in driving some of this variance?
I think that's a great example. I think that's true. And I think it's an interesting point, and it's a good point, because when I talked about motivation in the presentation, I kind of attributed it to the individual manager. Certainly individuals vary in their motivation to engage in any activity, but culture, absolutely, culture and norms play a significant role. And when that's the case, when that's the driver of this variance, if the variance is good, if it's desirable, if it's working well for the organization, then it's probably something we want to promote. If it's something that's dysfunctional, where it's reflecting essentially managers saying, I'm going to do what I want to do, I'm going to, cherry pick HR practices that work for me, and ignore the rest or give less attention to the rest, then that points to an area of investment that we need to target within the organization.
Great. So also a question that came in, kind of asks about the role of self-service HR here. I mean, obviously we've seen that as a trend in many organizations, increased reliance on self-service. As employees are accessing more HR information themselves, how does this kind of impact the role of the manager in your research?
So I think this is a good question as well. To the extent that it comes down to employees themselves being more self-reliant, then we may see, different types of employees or different employee groups that are disproportionately accessing or not accessing HR information on their own, that they may need different levels of support from their managers. So I think one consideration that's important is that as we see more of a move to self-service, this shouldn't mean that managers are taking less of a role or making less of an effort or less investment. I think it means that the role of the manager is making sure they're providing the support and figuring out which employees need the support and the kind of support that they need as this approach is changing.
Great. One more question that came in, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. the question is, seeing that dysfunctional variance is a lagging indicator, what are some of the leading indicators that we can look for in line managers and HR delivery?
Sorry,
so I
what's
think
the
that
lag?
so I think kind of like if you're thinking about dysfunctional variance, as you're saying, maybe these negative outcomes that come from the variation and delivery, how might we be able to predict the likelihood that managers will be maybe varying? I mean, maybe this goes to the motivation or the cultural issues or the access issues that you've been bringing to light already.
So this is also a great question. I think I can answer it in two ways. One is, yes, the factors that I identified in the presentation are the things we know. So managers are going to vary in their HR competencies and their technical competencies and their motivation to engage with HR. These are hopefully things that we can obviously initially hire for, but also kind of look out for and train for. There can be cultural aspects that we need to think about, creating a culture where managers are engaged and motivated to deliver the HR practices in the way we intend. The other side of that question is, or the other side of my answer is, that's exactly what we're hoping to get at in this research. We want to see what are those indicators, what allows us to predict when this is going to happen. So by examining that within an organization, by collecting data across different groups, different stakeholders, employees, HR, and managers, and seeing where that variance is happening, when it's functional and when it's dysfunctional, then we can see what are the key differences in the units where we see this occurring. What are the key differences across the managers that are engaging well or not in terms of HR delivery?
Great, makes a lot of sense. So with that, we'll turn it over to Annie Kim to share some of her research on team agility. Again, I would encourage you continue to share your comments and questions because we will have some time at the end to come back to those related to either of the presentations today. So Annie, you want to share your screen and tell us about your research?
All right, thank you, Brad. So I will tell you about my research from now on. So I'm Annie Kim, a PhD candidate of Cornell University, and Brad and I are working on a project about team change management, especially focusing on the question of how to manage teams in changing and dynamic situations. So for today, I will tell you about why this topic is important and what we already know about this and we don't, and how this study can solve the unresolved but still really important questions about effective team change management. So as we all know, change is an inevitable reality of modern organizations and teams. And specifically, the current organizations are going through dynamic internal and external changes. So for example, many times they need to adopt a new technology or practice to innovate and improve their products, services, and work processes. And frequently, organization environments dynamically change. So the organizations frequently experience market or economic situation changes, which require changes in their strategy and business planning. And in some cases, organizations may experience a change that is totally unexpected and unprepared, like a global pandemic that we are going through now. And whatever the change is, mostly those changes are unavoidable, frequent, impactful, and sometimes necessary. And the more we experience the changes, the more we have a strong need for timely and effective responses to them. And it is really important to manage the team change because any change event can have a profound impact on the whole spectrum of organizational and team functions. So for instance, the global outbreak of COVID-19 has dramatically changed the overall economy and market situation in the world. And accordingly, it changed the overall work process and structure of the current organizations, especially within teams. So for example, it changed the workplace arrangement, which required employees to work their team members in a totally different setting. And also it changed team communication and workplace relationships So for now, employees experience unexpected communication problems with their colleagues. And COVID-19 actually made restructuring and labor shortages happen at the same time. So it broke the existing pattern of staffing and workforce planning. And because of the work structure and routine change, employees need to adapt to a newly designed and arranged jobs and work processes. And also, team members need to adapt or even actively implement changes in their team strategy and planning. And because of the huge influence of a change event, the consequences of ineffective change adaptation and implementation can be far-reaching and grave for the organization. Then what do we know about the effects of team change? So one key lesson of prior studies about team change is that change is a double-edged sword. Specifically, it has been known that change can disrupt valuable team processes and reduce team performance. Or sometimes change event has been considered as an opportunity to make team members reflect about their bad habits and routines, which in turn may lead to performance improvement. And also, prior studies have examined some key factors that contribute to a successful adaptation, such as leadership and leader support, specifically how much a leader was prepared for the change or how much the leader supported the team members. And sometimes they focused on the established, and sometimes they focus on team member characteristics as well, such as their cognitive ability and goal orientation. And others have focused on established team task processes as an important factor for predicting a successful adaptation, specifically the extent to which team members have an accurate understanding on the overall work processes and other team members. And some researchers also examined the importance of some specific interventions, such as the effectiveness of training and change coaching program, or the importance of discussion chat sessions among team members about the changed roles and task structure after the change. But however, there are lots of things we still do not know about effective team change management. So for example, we have a partial understanding about what team change adaptation or management actually means. Specifically, prior studies have focused only on important factors that reduce the disruption from a change event. And I will explain this with a hypothetical graph. So this graph shows the performance change or disruption before and after a change event. And previously, researchers focused on the extent to which a team was able to prevent its performance decline after a change event as an important indicator of team change adaptation. But they actually somewhat ignored the performance recovery pattern after the disruption. Then why is this problematic? I will tell you more about this. So let's say there are two different teams with different performance outcomes before and after the same change event. So according to the prior study or research, for sure, Team B was more effective in managing the change. However, later, let's say we found that the two teams presented different recovery patterns of their performance after the change. So although Team A showed a huge reduction in its performance right after the change, but later it recovered the performance very quickly, and at some point it performed better than before the change. On the other hand, Team B did not experience much disruption from the change, but did not make a good performance recovery as well. So in this case, it is kind of tricky to say that Team B was more effective in managing the team change. So what we are planning to do is examining the two different outcomes, specifically performance decline after change events, as well as performance recovery or increase rate after disruption as key change adaptability outcomes. And specifically, we will examine the key factors that predict the two different outcomes. And we expect that it will open new possibilities to solve really important questions, such as how are the factors related to team adaptation, like why and how do the factors influence team adaptation? Or can we achieve diverse goals of change adaptation simultaneously? Or should we sacrifice one goal for the sake of another? And also we can answer for the question like, in what circumstances can we optimize team change adaptation? And the answer for this question can be dependent on the adaptation goal of a company. So for example, for some firms with some enough select resources, that it might be better to focus on team learning or the long-term performance increase. But for others, such as without those kinds of important Slack resources, then maybe the small disruption can be the major focus. And by doing this research, we expect to provide really valuable practical insights for our partners. So for example, we expect to provide some very important knowledge about your current status of team change adaptability, like the extent to which a recent change event disrupted the team processes or performance, or how much and quickly the performance was restored, or whether your teams could learn from the past and achieve better performance after the change. And also we expect to provide some practical suggestions to improve change adaptability based on the information about the key differences between those who could successfully manage the change and those who could not. And we also expect to provide some valuable insights for managing team through dynamic change by answering the important questions such as how to motivate team members to engage in change process, or which types of team resources are critical for managing change, and some important criteria that should be used to evaluate team performance following the change. Before I finish my presentation, I will explain a bit about the commitment we expect for our partners. Because of the concept of the study, so first of all, it is important that teams should experience past or ongoing changes. But I think because of the recent pandemic situation, many of your firms, or maybe all of your firms, may have some experience about some specific change or significant changes that influence your teams. And here, teams are defined as interdependent entities with shared goals. And for doing this research, we are planning to do some qualitative interviews to get some sense of the company's overall change experiences and its own needs pertaining to the change adaptation. And after the interview, we need to do team surveys, including both team leaders and members. And because of our longitudinal study design, we may need to do some surveys multiple times, because the more we measure, the more valuable and accurate insights we can provide. I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Great, thanks, Annie. So we have some time remaining. So again, welcome your questions here before we wrap up. So just fielding some of those questions as they come in. So Annie, a question related to your presentation. One of the questions is about, how do you think about measuring team performance, given that in any organization, there's many different types of teams doing many different types of work. So how do you kind of measure that within, or intend to measure that within your research?
Yeah, so it is a really important question, but what my answer is that it will be customized depending on the company that we are working with. So actually, performance measure is really different across different companies and industries. So for example, for manufacturing firms or factory, labor productivity can be an important performance index. But on the other hand, for service firms, customer satisfaction rating would be the right performance measure. So that's why we are planning to do, I'm planning to do some interviews before we collect the actual quantitative data. And I think by doing so, I think we will decide the right performance measure.
Great, thanks. So a question, Becca and June, related to your research. How do you view the role of HR business partners? It seems they would have an important influence on managers' HR activities and kind of managing the variance and whether that variance is dysfunctional or functional. So what's your views on that?
Yeah, I think I can answer the question. I think that's very important and relevant question, because the increasing importance of HR business partners is kind of directly relevant to our project. For instance, we know from prior research that line managers' opportunities to interact with HR, including participating from the HR design phase or giving input to HR departments, is an important predictor of their buy-in to the organization's HR policies. So considering that one of the roles of HR business partners is to serve as the intermediary between HR and the business, I think HR business partners' role could also be an important factor that causes both the functional and dysfunctional variation of line managers' HR behaviors. And also, in a broader sense, I think not only the role of HR business partners, but also the HR governance or the HR structure as a whole could be an important predictor that should be considered.
Great. So at this point, I was just going to say I don't see any questions coming in, but one just came in. Annie, this is directed at you and your research from Heather. Are you looking at kind of external family dynamics that impact team performance? I think the question is kind of getting at the idea of disruption might not only be internal to what's happening with an organization, the team, but it also might be kind of things that come externally from the external environment that teams and the members of those teams are embedded in.
So yes, so basically my focus is team change or team structure change or team task change or something like that. But still, the family members or external factors can be an important factor that influence the team disruptions or team performance disruptions. So of course, I'm still really interested in about the origins of the change, like whether it is the family issue or whether it is the actual task issue or something like that. So yeah, of course, it is really important factor. And the thing is that it can be different depending on the specific firms or specific teams of the my partners, like my future partner, because they may have different experiences. Even for the same change event, they may have some different experiences depending on their circumstances, or it may be some for their team composition or something like that. So yeah, I think this is a really important factor that I'm still interested about examining this too.
Great, good question, Heather, and thanks, Annie. So Becca and June, a question for you from Stephen. It's kind of building off the question around HR self-service. His question is kind of how does technology play into this? He kind of notes that some companies may not really be prepared from an IT perspective to deliver the necessary kind of HR content at the right time, place, and way to support the level of self-service really required. So do you see technology, I guess, as maybe a factor that plays into some of this variability that is occurring?
I think technology is absolutely a factor. This actually plays into the broader role of resources. So a trap that organizations can fall into is sort of designing an HR practice that, in theory, supports the organization's goals, support the goals for intended employee outcomes, but they don't put the necessary resources behind it. So I mentioned the availability of time of the manager responsible for implementing. I mentioned the availability of an HR business partner, the relationship that a local manager may have with that person. But other resources like technology, especially if we're relying on technology as a means of delivering HR information and practices, then that certainly plays in. I think the intersection between technology and all of the stakeholders that are present and involved in the HR process is something that requires greater exploration that falls right in the context of what we're studying.
Good. So Annie, a question regarding your research. The question is, will your research help us understand what factors make a team more change agile and or adaptable? And I think the answer is, of course, yes. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about, I think you touched on a little bit in your presentation, what are some of those factors that you expect to emerge as critical for defining team agility or predicting team agility?
Yeah, thank you for asking this question because that is the core of this study. And And of course, that is my purpose, to provide you with very important information about what are the key differences between those who could adapt to the change and who could not. For now, I'm planning to examine some factor that is related to the shared leadership of a team. So, which is whether a leadership role informally is taken by a one leader, or how much the leadership roles are kind of spread among different and diverse team members. And also there are other kind of factors that we can examine, like diversity of the team or the competition of factor of the team, and so forth. And as I told you before, still I'm really open to other kind of possibilities that our partners are specifically interested in about those factors. So that's why I'm planning to do some interviews for figuring out what could be the factors and that they are interested in and will be meaningful for them as well.
Great, thanks, Annie. So I want to be mindful of the time. I know we're almost at our time for today. So just as we wrap up, I want to thank you all for certainly attending the webcast today and sharing your input as well as your questions. I'm sure that'll be very valuable to the research teams as they continue to develop these projects. We will be sending you a link to a recording of this webcast, so certainly encourage you to share that with others who you think may be interested in learning more about these projects within your organizations. When we send that information to you, we'll also be sharing just a short kind of one-page summary of each of these projects. So again, to provide you more information in case you might be interested in getting involved or just learning more about these projects. There'll be information on both of those sheets about who you can contact, but you see on the slide here, the researchers' contact information, and I encourage you to reach out to any of them to follow up. And finally, I would just encourage you, we will be continuing to add different webcasts as well as virtual working groups throughout the summer into the fall. And those events will be added regularly on our CAHRS website. So please visit there to see our upcoming events, and we hope to see you at one of them in the near future. Thanks to our presenters today for sharing their interesting and timely research, and again, for all of you for attending. Stay well.